are 8,400,000 species of life, there are also many different living conditions. In the lower grades of life, in plant and tree life, there is no system for sexual intercourse. In the upper grades, in the life of birds and bees, there is sex, but the insects and animals do not know how to actually enjoy sex life. In the human form of life, therefore, there is full knowledge of how to enjoy sex. Indeed, there are many so-called philosophers who give directions on how to enjoy sex life. There is even a science called Kama Shastra, which is the science of sex. In human life, there are also such divisions as, now Prabhupada turns. He always makes a cut. He turns. Prabhupada could turn on a dime, we say in English. He's whatever he is absorbed in, he can just turn it around in a blink. In human life, there are also such divisions as Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. There is no sex life except in the Grihastha, or householder ashram. The Brahmachari is not allowed any sex. The Vanaprastha voluntarily refrains from sex, and the sannyasi is completely renounced. The karmis do not practice brahmacharya, vanaprastha, or sannyas life, for they are very much interested in grihastha life. In other words, a human being is very much materially inclined. Indeed, all living entities are materially inclined. They prefer grihastha life because there is a concession for sex. The karmis think the other statuses of life are worse than animal life, for animals also have sex, whereas the brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyasi completely give up sex. Did you ever read a line and then you didn't even hear a word? I'm going to read that line again. The karmis think the other statuses of life are worse than animal life, for animals also have sex, whereas the brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyasi completely give up sex. Got it. The karmis, therefore, abhor these orders of spiritual life. Srila Prabhupada ki? Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnanam Janasalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master is kindly opening my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Well, I guess there's a reason that I was asked to give class, because I have to give up sex desire, right? And therefore we're always challenged. Yeah. So, well, the first thing that struck me was how everything the lady's saying is so ironic, and it's completely backwards. It's just like, forgive me, I'm going to have to make a reference to the fellow inhabiting the Oval Office in America again. Everything he says, everything he criticizes others for, he's like, he personifies to the max. It's incredible. Or as Prabhupada would say, as soon as you point a finger, 3 point right back at you. So, as Prabhupada would say, any fool can criticize, but how are we going to improve the situation, right? How are we going to be the change that I want to see in myself and in the world? How can I expect to unite with others? So just as he buttered her up, chatted her up, flattered her, now she's chatting him up, So they're getting really enthusiastic. Yeah. So this kind of enthusiasm is, as Prabhupada would say, not required. That was his... Yeah, and then she goes on. Such foolish persons are like animals. Well, that's exactly what they're doing, as Prabhupada would say. If your philosophy is sex, then the animals are better at it, right? The dogs run free, why can't we? That's what they say in America, right? I just remembered. 1975, Prabhupada came to Philadelphia to attend their Rath Yatra for the first time. You've heard of Philadelphia here? Yeah, it's a big city. It's the first capital of America, actually. Well, New York, and then they moved to Philly, and then they moved to Washington. So Prabhupada came, and it was a very stormy time with the press and Prabhupada, because it was at that time that the lady reporters were understanding that Prabhupada was identifying a traditionally subordinate position for the lady in the husband-wife role. So all these feminist reporters were really firing on him. So so Prabhupada, Prabhupada's trump card, his ace in the hole when he was dealing with feminist reporters was this line: Where is the equality? I can't have a baby. You people can. How come I can't have a baby? No fair. You know? I'm just paraphrasing, but that was his stopper. Where is the equality? Where is the freedom? Of course, now they're trying to, they changed their gender and but so anyway, that was kind of stopping them. But here's something that happened. Prabhupada was talking about how we protect our ladies, we don't let them, get exploited, but it was 1975. So in that time, we nouveau celibates, brahmacharis and sannyasis. I was in the Brahmachari Ashram then for 5 years. We weren't treating our ladies very well, in case you haven't heard the history, right? So we came back to the temple after this triumphant, press conference, airport arrival, and Prabhupada just, with sheer force of logic, showed the feminist reporters that there's no equality materially. The only equality is spiritually, and he really got into that too. How our ladies have equal opportunity to serve Krishna. But back at the temple, what did our ladies experience? It was a little temple. It wasn't today. Anybody been to Philadelphia? Okay, there's a temple there, and it's a former hotel, turn of the century. It's like 100 years old or something. So, but it was before they moved into that place in Chestnut Hill. It was a little house on a street called Woodlawn Street. And whenever Prabhupada went, hundreds of people came. So there was no room for everybody. We were coming up from Florida, Gainesville, and everywhere. People just descended, converged. Because wherever Prabhupada was, it was an historic event. It was a happening. So Prabhupada, the leaders escort him in, the GB sannyasis, and they come in and sit around Prabhupada right up front. And then Ras Brahmachari squeezed in. No room for the ladies. Not a square centimeter. What do you use down here? Centimeters? Okay. So what were the ladies doing? Out of desperation, they were circling the house looking for open windows. It was July, it was summer in the northern hemisphere. And they couldn't open the windows even. So their faces were pressed against the windows. Their noses were squashed, against the windows. And so Prabhupada notices that. He's on the Vyasasana and he's singing, and then he stops and he looks and he said, "What is this? They want to hear. Make room." So Prabhupada squishes the GBCs and the sannyasis in a corner, near him, and then one by one the Vaishnavis come in and they look at Prabhupada and they're just so grateful to his divine grace for letting them in and hearing, because as Prabhupada knew, they're just as good as their brothers, as Prabhupada writes in the CC, in the purport, because they're Vaishnavis, they're not materialistic ladies, unlike the lady representing materialistic intelligence in the verse. She says, such foolish persons are like animals. Well, but come on. She's proposed, her behavior and words are espousing a philosophy which is like animals. Okay, so back to this. So we had the Ratha Yatra in Philly. And at the end of the Ratha Yatra, Srila Prabhupada, they parked the cart at this place called the Art Museum of Philadelphia. Nice green. And then on the back of the Art Museum, there's a long slope. I visited there not long ago. It's still there. I saw the exact place where Prabhupada, he was sitting kind of at the top of a long slope on a makeshift Vyasasana, and we were all kind of below him. It was appropriate. It was very fitting. And a beautiful green art, these Ionic columns, Greek columns. And Prabhupada's lecturing. Right in the middle of the lecture, there was a fad in America in 1975 amongst college kids. And the fad was called streaking. Has anybody heard? Did they have this in Australia? They did? Okay. So, after all, it was the Youth International Party, right? The yippies. So all over the world, the young college kids were streaking. So this boy and girl, right in the middle of the whole thing, they just run through the crowd, stark naked. And Prabhupada didn't bat an eye. He just kept going. Whereas earlier in San Diego, you've heard of San Diego? It's in the southwest corner of the U.S. Very nice climate. So Prabhupada was at another situation. It was at a Ratha Yatra around what they call Balboa Park. And so Prabhupada sits up to give a lecture, and practically as soon as Prabhupada starts speaking, you hear this voice in the crowd. This objector. He's already objecting, just like you've had your history of people interrupting Prabhupada here in Melbourne, right at the town hall, and it happened in Paris in '74 with the students, right? So right away, the student stands up and he starts hollering. And you hear Prabhupada say in the recording, what does he say? And Karandar Prabhu says, he says he wants to have sex more than once in a month, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada just turns on a dime and he starts, he changes his whole lecture. And he talks about animalistic sex and dharmic sex. It's great. And Prabhupada is talking all about how, yes, in the West you have this whole, he would always mock Freud, who thought that everything boiled down to sex. And on one level, Freud was right, that everything motivating people in whatever species of life, living entities, was sex desire. Purusha prakriti stohi bhungte prakriti jam gunan karanam guna sangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying bhungte prakriti, enjoying the three modes of material nature. In this way, he meets with good and evil amongst various species. So whether we're lizards or, whatever we are, I saw this bird I'd never seen before in the botanical gardens. Sri Krishna Prabhu took me there. We were walking by the big pond. I guess Prabhupada must have walked there. And then we stopped because these ladies were stopped, these older ladies, probably younger than me. I always forget how old I am. And they were looking at this bird on the branch. I'd never seen a bird like this because you have a lot of different birds, and we don't have marsupials in America. Wallabies and kangaroos. Koalas. Okay, and so I looked up at this bird. This bird was sitting there very kind of regally, and he had this tuft. His head was all tufted. Well, this wasn't a cockatoo. I said, excuse me, ladies, what is that? Oh, that's a baby kookaburra. And it's very rare. These kookaburras are very shy, and you don't see them much. And this is a baby. Maybe he lost his way or something. And he's just sitting there, and it's a very unusual bird. He kind of looked like he had punk hair, kind of. Yeah. But that's what we're doing. We're just chasing the opposite sex. And it never works. 1839 Gita. I think I read it already in another class. Happiness in the mode of passion. It comes from senses. Who knows 1839? You got it? Gopa Vrindesh Prabhu, we know you know it. And that happiness, which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is happiness in the mode of passion. And the purport, Prabhupada really gets into it. He spells it out. A man meets a woman, he sees her, he wants to touch her, he wants to have sexual intercourse, but then later on it turns sour, and there's divorce, and there's heartache, and that's the way it is, because we're never satisfied in the material world. We're not matter. So no matter how we, as Prabhupada puts it here, in the human form of life, however, there is full knowledge of how to enjoy sex. So these elaborate arrangements. Just for that Chapala Sukha, and that recording of Prabhupada giving the purport to that Bhaja Hooray Mana. Yeah, he says, so Govinda Das is saying, aren't you ashamed? Simply for a little flickering happiness, you're working so hard, day and night, just to have a little, it's not worth it. It's really oversold, it's overdone. It's not what it's cracked up to be. Yeah, and so that's why we have ashram. And Prabhupada writes, in human life there are also such divisions as Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. And it's interesting how they're all defined by our relationship with the opposite sex. Because that's what we keep coming back for. So ashram is where we actually learn our lessons. So Brahmachari life, ideally, there's little to no connection with the opposite sex. And even the Brahmachari is trained to see all ladies as his mother. And then the Grihastha, most people do have to go through that stage. It's a rare soul who can skip that stage. Sees all ladies except his wife as mother. Then the Vanaprastha, there's different kinds of Vanaprastha. I'm in that ashram. I have an interesting definition of Vanaprastha. If you know my history, you don't, but it's a little risque, but I'll tell you what my definition of a Vanaprastha is. Somebody who goes to bed lonely and wakes up grateful. Because he's learned his lesson. Anyway, that's where I'm at, that's... So, and then sannyas, completely... He's dedicating his life now to making the whole world his family. Did I tell you the story of Prabhupada's wife? What did I tell that? In the Bhagavatam class? Did I tell that? Oh. Maybe I told it in the seminars. Yeah, I told it there, right? Okay, so those of you who weren't in the seminars, how long was Srila Prabhupada in his Grihastha ashram? He was married in 1918. He left it in 54. The tea or me was the last straw. Prabhupada turned on his heels, walked out. And they thought he was coming back. Anyway, 36 years, you do the math. 5 children. And they were never supportive of his mission, or even trying to help him expand materially, because Prabhupada was predicted by an astrologer to become another Birla. So they wouldn't cooperate. So finally, when Radharani Dey, his dear wife, had the temerity, the audacity, the gall to pawn his Bhagavatam for tea biscuits, that was like a real statement, right? She could have chosen something else. There's heavier. There's not only books are heavy. On the scale there's this, and then you want. So that's a lot of tea biscuits for Prabhupada's book. So Prabhupada's mortified. That was it. Turned on his heels, walked out. They never saw him again. Tea or me? Tea or me? Well, if I have to choose between tea or my husband, I'll have to choose the tea. And Prabhupada said, of course she thought I was joking. But no joke. This is it. Finished. So he walked out, went to Paramahansa Maharaja's ashram in South Calcutta, chanted at the top of his voice Hare Krishna for 2 weeks, releasing 36 years of that Grihastha ashram. And even one of his daughters wasn't married. But he was done. He was really done. I'm out of here, as we would say. So in his last days with us, Prabhupada, as part of his will, made provisions for his family, which he hadn't. He was penniless when he left, but he did make provisions for his family with a stipend for Radharani, his wife, and then he said something to my godbrother Shadadanya, I think Maharaj at the time. If you ever have trouble with my family, here's the name and number and address of a family friend who is very appreciative of our movement and who knows the family. If you ever have trouble. Sure enough, I think it was around 1984, 83, early 80s, after Prabhupada left this world, one of Prabhupada's sons had really become inimical. He was a communist, a Bengali communist, and he convinced his mother to give him power of attorney so that he could represent her in the court and make a case that all the assets of ISKCON really belonged to them. They were the rightful inheritors of ISKCON's assets. And it was because Prabhupada's wife was so bitter about the way he never returned. He never came back. And they were grown by then. Even the youngest child was Vrindavan Chandra, who was born in 1939. So in 1954, he was 15 years old. He was the youngest. So they were capable of supporting their mother and making their way in the world. But they were just so bitter because for decades, Abai Babu had been supporting them, even though they were completely uncooperative and useless. Prabhupada dutifully supported them until tea or me. So she was bitter. So she gave her son power of attorney to represent her at the bank and in the court. So he was making a big stink in Calcutta about how this sannyas he took was illegitimate, the family did not give permission. And so we need reparations here. We're really the rightful inheritors of ISKCON's assets. So, when the devotees in Mayapur got wind of this suit that M.M. Day was trying to launch, Shadadanya Prabhu remembered that he had the name, address, and number of this sympathetic family friend who was also legally savvy. He might have even been an attorney, I forget exactly. So he goes to Calcutta, and the person is still living there at the place, and he tells, and this man is completely fluent in Bengali and English, he's a very educated Bengali gentleman, and he explains to the man what M.M. Day is doing, and how can he help us turn this around, because it's very disturbing. So he said, yes, of course, I will help you. So the gentleman, took Shadadanya to where Radharani was still living, in North Calcutta. And he introduced Mataji to Shadadanya, and he explained in Bengali what he had come for, because your son is making this big disturbance in the court, making a false claim for the assets of your husband's spiritual institution. Would you kindly rescind this power of attorney? So, once Prabhupada's wife understands what's going on, then she just vents 30 years of bitterness over what her husband had done and left us in dire straits, which really wasn't true, but it was really a bitter response she had to Prabhupada's leaving home for good. At the age of 54, 58 years old. Yeah, he wasn't, Prabhupada didn't take sannyas till 59, but he had been in that ashram for a long time. And she goes on and on and on in Bengali, and the man's listening, and Shadadanya can't understand a word, but he gets the idea that Prabhupada's former wife is hopping mad and full of bile and venom and bitterness over what happened. So, then she's done, she's spent, she said her piece, and then the gentleman gives Shadadanya the short form answer, it gives him the gist of what she's saying. So then the way Shadadanya tells the story is that while he's hearing the gentleman explain what his wife is saying, he's feeling Prabhupada empower him to respond as compassionately and as honestly and as spiritually as possible to Radharani's bitterness. So he does, and I'm just paraphrasing, but he says, Mataji, yes, your husband left the family after 36 years, and I know it must have been very hard for you and your children. But do you know what your husband did after he left the family? And she actually didn't even know. Because, as I told that story about the lady in Scotland who didn't know God because she didn't want to know, it's the same thing. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to know. But then Shadadanya described how he went to the West and on the orders of his spiritual master, and he started a spiritual revolution, a whole movement to turn the world around, and that he, Stan Fedorov, who had become Shadadanya, Das, and then Maharaj, had been saved by your husband, Mataji, and so many saved. And he opened up 108 centers before he left this world in 1977. Yes, he left the family, but he made the whole world his family and saved so many people. I was lost, I was drug addicted, I was hopeless, I was suicidal. And while Shadadanya is speaking, he begins to see Radharani's heart change right before his eyes, and she was realizing how great her husband actually was, and she didn't even know it. And she even expressed that later. I did not know who he actually was, how great he was. He was always trying to gauge me in the mission, but I didn't. I just wanted to have a nice, peaceful home life with the children, and that was true. Prabhupada always told us, whenever I tried to have a home program, she would take the children in the back, and she didn't want any part of it. And Prabhupada said, my wife was he was a nice, pious lady, but she didn't want any part of the mission, right? But then now she's saying, I did not know. I didn't realize. And she's tearing up, and so she said, yes, I will rescind that power of attorney. I'm very sorry. So Prabhupada, Shadadanya, I could feel Prabhupada empowering me to preach to his former wife. And so if you ever meet Chaitanya Prabhu, he still lives in Mayapur. He's back, he went, it was one of those things where he went Brahmachari, Sannyas, Grihastha, which is not standard, as you know, but it happened. Even many of you weren't here back in the day, but even your Emperor of Sankirtan in Australia, Madhavis Prabhu, took that route. And when I was indexing Prabhupada's books, I was the indexer for the Bhagavatams from 1976, January, to 1980. And so when that purport, there was a purport in the 8th canto, which came down, the Gajendra Leela. Gajendra, as you know, is out of his element. And Prabhupada had just finished the 7th canto, where it talks about Vantashi, someone who takes sannyas, and then he goes back to Grihastha life. It's like somebody eating his own vomit. I mean, it was a real stark image. Ooh. But then, Prabhupada would not always, but he would often incorporate his realizations as he was spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. So in the Gajendra Leela, right after the 7th canto, he talks about how Gajendra was, the elephant was out of his element. For 1,000 celestial years, wow, that's like 180,000 earth years, he's fighting the crocodile. Elephant can stomp a crocodile any day of the week on the land, but in the water, he's out of his element. He's getting weaker, and he's going to lose. He's going to die. But then he remembers from his previous life, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yeah. And other mantras, Prabhupada quotes in the purport, we should remember the Brahma Samhita and different mantras. So Prabhupada very compassionately in his purports to Gajendra Leela says, so if you find yourself in Gajendra's position where you're over your head, you're out of your element, you're getting weaker trying to practice Krishna consciousness, there's no need to die or quit. Just go to the place where you can fight Maya from your natural place. So that's how it was in Prabhupada's Leela. He was deputing 20-somethings to be sannyasis. That's not the way it works. That's not orthodox. That's not natural. And even when Prabhupada was giving some of my godbrothers sannyas when they were 20-somethings, they would say, frankly, Srila Prabhupada, I don't know if I can do this my whole life. Prabhupada said, that's okay, this is an emergency. So just like on the battlefield, there is, battlefield commission. When somebody is not qualified really, but then they have to be the new leader, like the Kurus did on Kurukshetra. They kept having to appoint new generals because they were losing. After Bhishma fell, that was the turning point. So that's okay. Krishna will help you. And if later on you have to, marry, he even said that to one person. But stay with one woman, he said. Don't become a scandal. So when I read that purport in the 8th canto about, it was I summarized it in my mind as wear white and fight. If that's what you have to do to keep going, then do it, and don't feel like you're hopeless and you're going to hell. And it's from the orthodox point of view, it's a disgrace. But Srila Prabhupada, making adjustments for our fallen nature, he's allowing us to do that if that's what you have to do. So, oops, it's after 1:15. I don't have time for questions because I got to run. But is everybody going to the fundraiser tonight? Please come. We're going to cheer everybody on, cheer ourselves on, so we can keep doing this wonderful project here, ISKCON Melbourne, new deity kitchen, so we can expand the prasadam distribution. So, good on you, mites. You're doing a good job. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.